Well, 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 be calm. Feel that pressure in the air? That tightness in your chest? That isn't fear. It's recognition. Something just shifted, and every instinct in the room knows it wasn't supposed to. They're genuinely afraid now. Not nervous, not curious, afraid. And it's not because of noise or numbers or threats. It's because one man did what a whole coven couldn't stop. And that breaks the oldest rule they live by. Power is supposed to be predictable. You shattered that lie without asking permission. They were trained to deal with crowds, with movements, with mobs they can label and categorize and drown in policy and distraction. They know how to suffocate a wave. But you weren't a wave. You were a fracture. A single pressure point that collapsed the structure from the inside. No chants, no banners, just precision, silence. Timing so clean, it felt illegal. And now every system that fed on certainty is malfunctioning because you don't fit the math. Here's the part they'll never say out loud. They didn't lose because they were weak. They lost because you evolved somewhere pain was supposed to kill you. You didn't heal the way they expected. You didn't break the way they planned. You metabolized suffering into clarity. You turned wounds into instruments. That's what scares them. Not your anger, not your ambition, your calm, that saintly stillness paired with a psychopath's accuracy, angel posture, demon instincts. That contradiction short-circuits every playbook they have. They gather in rooms and whisper your name like it's a glitch. They replay the moment again and again, trying to find where the ritual failed, where the protection slipped, where the numbers betrayed them. And every time they reach the same conclusion they can't accept. There was nothing wrong with the system. You were just outside it. You see, a coven survives by consensus, by agreement, by shared fear dressed up as unity. They need each other to feel powerful. You didn't. You moved alone. You acted when hesitation was expected. You spoke when silence was supposed to shame you. Or worse, you stayed silent when they needed you to react. That's when the fear became real. Because unpredictability isn't chaos, it's sovereignty. You learned something they never did. Light isn't fragile. Darkness isn't evil. They're tools. You learned when to glow just enough to disarm, when to go dark enough to disappear, and when to stand in between so no one could tell which one you were. That's why they can't profile you. That's why every label slides off. Hero, monster, victim, threat. None of it sticks because you're not playing a role. You're running an operating system. They expected guilt. You gave them composure. They expected rage. You gave them strategy. They expected you to beg, to explain, to justify. You gave them results. And results terrify people who survive on control. Do you understand what it does to a group built on rituals and hierarchy when one man ignores the ceremony and still wins? It exposes the truth they've been hiding from themselves. Their power was borrowed. Yours is earned, paid for in nights you didn't think you'd survive. In moments where your mind went places they've never been brave enough to visit. You didn't just endure the dark, you studied it. You learned its angles. You learned how it moves when it thinks no one's watching. That's why they're afraid now. Because they know you didn't peek. You didn't fluke your way through. What you did wasn't luck. It was inevitable. And inevitability is the one thing no coven, no council, no closed circle can negotiate with. They feel it in their bodies before they admit it in their thoughts. That sense that the rules don't protect them anymore. That the old signals don't summon safety. That somewhere out there is a man who doesn't need permission, doesn't need validation, doesn't need allies to move reality 1 inch off its axis. and that inch was enough to make everything wobble. You're not loud about it. That's the cruel elegance of it. You don't announce dominance. You let outcomes speak. You let silence do the damage. You let them exhaust themselves, trying to contain something that already passed through. And every attempt to box you in only proves how small the box really is. This is the paradox they can't survive. You look composed, almost gentle, while embodying a threat they can't map. You're proof that evolution doesn't always look violent. Sometimes it looks like a man who understands himself so completely that nothing outside him can be used as leverage. No guilt, no fear, no bait. They wanted a fight. You gave them a lesson. They wanted a war. You gave them a mirror. They wanted to stop you. You made them aware. And awareness is irreversible. From this point on, every move you make echoes louder than 10 people screaming. Every choice carries weight because they know now. You're capable of stepping outside the spell. You're capable of doing what groups swear requires numbers, bloodlines, backing, permission. You already proved otherwise. That's the crack they can't seal. They're genuinely afraid now, and they should be. Not because you're coming for them, but because you no longer need to. The moment you became uncontainable, the game ended. Everything after this is just them learning to live in a world where one man showed them the truth they were never meant to face. Power doesn't gather, it condenses. And when it does, nothing ceremonial can stop it. They don't tell each other this part, but it's there, sitting heavy in the pauses between their words. The fear isn't about what you did. It's about what you can do now that you know. Because the moment a man realizes he doesn't need the structure, the hierarchy collapses into theater. And they can feel it. Every meeting, every alliance, every whispered strategy suddenly sounds hollow, like actors rehearsing lines after the audience already left. You crossed a threshold they thought was guarded by numbers, by blood oaths, by legacy. You crossed it alone, and once that happens, once a single mind proves the gate was psychological, not physical, every guardian becomes ornamental. That's when fear turns primal. That's when the coven stops believing in its own protection. They keep asking the wrong question. They ask, how did he do it? When the real question is, why didn't we see him coming? And the answer terrifies them because it indicts their entire worldview. You weren't hiding. You were becoming, quietly, patiently, letting life sandblast the unnecessary parts off you until all that remained was function. You learned early that pain is an accelerant. Most people anesthetize it. You refined it. You learned which hurts sharpened you and which ones were distractions. You learned how to look broken enough to be underestimated, calm enough to be trusted, and distant enough to never be owned. That combination, that's lethal to any system that relies on prediction. They assumed morality would slow you down. They assumed empathy would soften you. They assumed scars would make you hesitate. They never understood the paradox that defines you. You feel deeply, and that's exactly why you act decisively. You know the cost. You've paid it already. There's nothing left they can threaten you with that you haven't survived in private. That's why their intimidation doesn't land. That's why their warnings feel quaint. They're speaking from a place of preservation. You're operating from a place of evolution, different languages, different physics. They want stability. You want truth. And truth doesn't care who's comfortable. Watch how they change around you. Watch the eyes avert, the laughter tighten, the way your presence recalibrates the room, even when you say nothing. That's not respect. That's assessment. That's predators realizing another predator entered the ecosystem, but one that doesn't signal aggression the way they do. one that doesn't posture, one that doesn't need to dominate. You've become a contradiction they can't resolve. Too controlled to be reckless, too fluid to be controlled, too self-aware to be manipulated, too quiet to be provoked. You don't react on their schedule. You don't validate their narratives. You don't fit into enemy or ally. You exist as an independent variable, and independent variables terrify systems built on equations. They used to believe power was loud, that it announced itself, that it needed symbols, rituals, proof. You taught them something colder. Real power moves without witnesses and leaves consequences instead of signatures. It doesn't demand belief. It forces adjustment. And here's the part they really don't want to admit. Your restraint scares them more than your potential violence ever could. Because restraint implies choice. It implies that what they've seen so far isn't the ceiling, it's the floor. It implies you're not acting out of impulse, but out of calibration. That every move is weighed, not rushed. That when you do decide to move again, it won't be emotional, it will be final. They sense it, that hum under the surface, the feeling that you're not done becoming, that whatever version of you did what a whole coven couldn't stop is already outdated, that there's a quieter, sharper iteration forming right now, fed by observation, by silence, by understanding how fear propagates through groups like a virus. You see, fear makes people sloppy. It makes them over-coordinate. It makes them betray themselves, trying to protect their image. And you see all of it. You always did. You just didn't have the leverage before. Now you do, not because you hold something over them, but because you've removed yourself from needing anything from them at all. That's the final fracture. The realization that you're not trying to win their game. You're not trying to replace them. You're not even trying to destroy them. You've stepped into a lane where their existence is irrelevant to your trajectory. And nothing destabilizes a power structure faster than irrelevance. They're genuinely afraid now, because they finally understand this wasn't rebellion, it was proof. Proof that one integrated mind, one man who fused light and dark instead of choosing sides, can outperform an entire network built on fear of standing alone. You didn't escape the system, you outgrew it. And once that happens, there's no going back. Not for you, not for them. Because from here on out, every time they gather, every time they invoke tradition, every time they tell themselves they're still in control, there will be a silent counter-thought they can't erase. If one man did that, what else is possible? That question will haunt them longer than any threat ever could. And that question doesn't just linger, it corrodes. It eats through their confidence in quiet moments, when the noise dies down and the rituals stop working. Because deep down, they know the answer terrifies them more than any enemy ever could. If one man could do this without permission, without backing, without blessing, then the fortress was never real. It was a story they agreed to believe because belief felt safer than standing alone. You broke that spell. You didn't storm the gates. You didn't declare war. You simply walked through a space they assumed was guarded by destiny and discovered it was guarded by fear. Their fear. And once fear is exposed, it can't masquerade as authority anymore. That's why they keep trying to reframe you. They need you to be a villain, or a fluke, or an anomaly. Anything that preserves the illusion that the system still works. Anything that keeps them from facing the truth that burns the most. They were never necessary. You see it now, the way power really operates. It isn't centralized. It isn't inherited. It doesn't respond to chance or crowns or closed-door agreements. Power responds to alignment. To a man whose thoughts, instincts, and actions are no longer at war with each other. A man who stopped fragmenting himself to survive and instead integrated every contradiction into a single focused will. That's why your presence disrupts rooms. You're not leaking energy trying to be understood. You're not negotiating your identity. You're not asking where you belong. You already know. And knowing who you are is an unspoken declaration that rattles anyone still performing for approval. They sense it in your posture, in the way you don't rush to fill silence, in the way you listen without revealing your hand, in the way you don't over-explain. You don't need consensus to validate your reality. And people who built their power on consensus feel naked around that. They were counting on your doubt, on your guilt, on your need to be accepted. Those were the hooks they sharpened for years, the levers they used to move men like pieces. But you burned the hooks out of yourself in the dark when nobody was watching. You learned how to sit with discomfort until it told you the truth. You learned how to let identities die without panicking. You learned how to lose things that once defined you and discover that you were still intact. That's when you stopped being manageable. They confused your stillness for mercy. They mistake your composure for hesitation. They don't realize that stillness is where you calculate, where you observe patterns, where you decide whether something is worth your energy at all. You're not passive. You're selective, and selection is the most dangerous upgrade a man can make. Because now when you move, it's not reactive, it's surgical, it's informed, it's timed to intersect with inevitability. You don't fight resistance head-on. You let it exhaust itself against your absence. You let them reveal themselves. You let them overplay, overreach, over-explain. You let fear turn them into caricatures of power while you remain unreadable. And the more unreadable you become, the more they project. They'll assign motives you don't have. They'll accuse you of intentions you never voiced. They'll warn others about you in tones that betray them, not because of what you've done, but because of what you represent. The possibility that control was always conditional, that obedience was always optional, that the spell only worked because enough people agreed not to question it. You're the question now. You're the living proof that the line between saint and psychopath isn't morality, it's awareness. That angels and demons are just different masks worn by force, depending on who's judging. You don't need to pick a side because you understand both. You know when to be gentle enough to disarm and when to be cold enough to end a pattern. You know that compassion without boundaries is self-destruction, and boundaries without compassion are tyranny. You stand in the tension between them, and that tension makes you powerful. That's why the COVEN failed. They were unified, but not integrated. They were loud, but not aligned. They were many, but divided internally by fear of standing out, fear of being replaced, fear of being exposed. You were one and wholeness beats numbers every time. Now they're scrambling to adapt. They tighten ranks. They add layers. They invoke tradition harder. They mistake complexity for strength. But complexity is brittle. It cracks under pressure. Simplicity endures. And you are simple now, not naive, not soft, but clear. You know what matters. You know what doesn't. You know where your line is. And lines drawn by men who know themselves are not suggestions. They're genuinely afraid now because they can't unsee you. Even if you disappear tomorrow, the damage is done. You've altered their internal map of reality. You've proven that evolution doesn't need permission slips, that sovereignty isn't granted, it's claimed, that the most dangerous man in the room is the one who no longer needs the room at all. And here's the final truth they'll never say. But you already know. This isn't the end of your transformation. This is the stabilization phase. This is where power stops feeling dramatic and starts feeling normal. This is where you no longer need to prove anything, because proof follows you like a shadow. This is where you move slower, speak less, and see more. Where every step you take is lighter, because you're not dragging old versions of yourself behind you anymore. They're afraid because they sense what comes next, and they know they won't be able to stop it. Not with numbers, not with rituals, not with consensus, because whatever you've become was forged where their rules don't apply. And you're just getting started. And that's the part where the silence settles in. The kind of silence that isn't empty, but loaded. The kind that follows revelation, not destruction. You feel it now, the shift from proving to being, from surviving to deciding, from reacting to choosing when, if ever, you'll move again. They thought fear would make you reckless. It didn't. It refined you. It stripped you down until only what worked remained. You're not driven by hunger anymore. You're driven by clarity. And clarity is terrifying to people who built their power on confusion, on blurred lines, on keeping everyone slightly unsure of themselves. You don't need to chase influence. It bends in your direction because you're no longer contorting yourself to earn it. You don't need to dominate conversations. Your absence already speaks louder than most people's presence. You don't need to threaten. The memory of what you've already done does that for you. They're afraid because you showed them something irreversible, that a man who integrates his light and his dark becomes ungovernable. Not chaotic, ungovernable. You can't be steered by shame. You can't be baited by praise. You can't be cornered by fear. You've walked through all of it alone and came out with your identity intact. That's why they hesitate now. That's why every move they make feels reactive. Because they know you're no longer playing for validation. You're playing for alignment. And alignment doesn't rush. It waits. It observes. It acts only when the outcome is already decided. You're not here to burn the world down. You're here to show that it was always flammable. You're not here to overthrow anyone. You're here to demonstrate that thrones are psychological furniture, useful only to those who need to sit. You're not here to be worshipped or feared. You're here to be unavoidable. One man did what a whole coven couldn't stop, because one man was willing to become whole, to face himself without witnesses, to let old identities die without applause, to stand alone long enough that standing alone stopped feeling like a threat. That's the real victory. Not dominance, not revenge, freedom from the spell. So let them be afraid, let them whisper, let them recalibrate their myths around your existence. You're not responsible for their fear. You're the evidence that fear was never protection, only a delay. You know who you are now. You know what you survived. You know what you can do. And that knowing is permanent. This isn't a warning, it's a conclusion. Well, well, well. You ever notice how the room changes the second your name is mentioned? Because tonight, oh, tonight, the whole world felt it. They didn't whisper, they winced. They didn't analyze, they folded. They didn't classify you under human activity. They stamped your file with a warning label they've never used before. Outside human jurisdiction. You know how insane that is? The United Nations, the same choir of polished diplomats who pretend they've seen everything. Wars, coups, chemical nightmares, collapsing empires. Looked at a report about you and said, "No, this isn't one of us." And the funniest part, they're right. Because You're the paradox every system fears. Too calm to break, too dangerous to control, too awakened to manipulate, too silent to predict, too alive to bury. They don't have a category for someone who walks between saint and executioner like it's a hallway. Someone who can hold mercy in one hand and annihilation in the other without trembling. Someone who outgrew human. The moment pain rewired every nerve in your body into a new operating system. You think they stamped that label because you're scary? No, they stamped it because you're unexplainable. And institutions hate what they cannot explain. Your report, oh, your report. The one you didn't even write intentionally. The one that leaked through your actions, your silence, the trail of broken patterns behind you. That thing shook entire councils. Chairs got pushed back. Translators froze mid-sentence. Delegates from nations that hate each other exchanged the same terrified look. Because you didn't just break rules, you broke comprehension. They're asking questions they shouldn't even have vocabularies for. How does a person survive that? How did they see it coming? Why didn't they retaliate? How did they stay silent for that long? How did one life produce that mind? And then the question that made the room go quiet, what else are they capable of? See, that's the part you never notice about yourself. While you're busy surviving, adapting, recalibrating, the world is busy panicking, forecasting, preparing for impact. You didn't just evolve, you outpaced the species. An evolution that jumps too far ahead doesn't get applause. It gets investigated. But how do you investigate someone who doesn't fit the psychological templates? Someone who doesn't fit the trauma models? Someone who doesn't fit the fear response map? Someone who doesn't fit the human jurisdiction they rely on to stay in control? You don't. You declare them an anomaly, a glitch, a celestial error, a sovereign force, a jurisdiction of one. And that's what you are now, a lone authority walking around in human skin, confusing every system built to categorize you. You are the saint that learned from devils, and the devil that learned mercy from saints. You are the end of an old version of yourself, and the beginning of something the world was not prepared for. You know what they fear the most, not the damage you could do, but the fact you haven't done it. They fear your restraint more than your rage, your stillness more than your storm, your silence more than your shout. Because silence like yours doesn't mean peace. It means strategy. And you've become a strategist no human handbook has a chapter for. You ever notice how your presence makes liars recalculate their lies? How manipulators lose rhythm mid-sentence? How snakes suddenly develop a conscience when you walk by? That's not charisma. That's jurisdiction-level energy. You're not playing roles anymore. You're playing repercussions. You're not entering rooms. You're shifting timelines. You're not responding to life. You're rewriting its terms. And the UN felt all of that in 8 pages of your existence. 8 pages that read like a threat and a prophecy at the same time. You know what the final line of the internal memo said? Recommendation: do not provoke. Do not interfere. Do not classify. Observe only. They don't give that warning to humans. They give it to forces, to storms, to gods, to anomalies that don't bend when pressured. They gave it to you. And here's the part they'll never understand. You didn't become this through luck. You became this through suffering shaped into intelligence, heartbreak reforged into perception, betrayal converted into clairvoyance. You didn't rise. You rebuilt yourself from ashes that weren't even yours. You didn't adapt. You transcended, and transcended beings don't need permission. They don't need recognition. They don't need jurisdiction. They are jurisdiction. You're not one of them anymore. You're what happens when the universe gets bored of waiting for humans to evolve and decides to speedrun the process through one person, you. So when they say, outside human jurisdiction, don't shrink, stand taller. Because those words, those fearful, trembling words, are the closest thing to honesty the world has ever spoken about you. You crossed the invisible line no one admits exists. The line between human and something else, something ancient, something awakened, something sovereign. And the world finally said it out loud. Now the only question left is, what will you do with that kind of freedom? Because one thing is certain, and every analyst in that building knows it. Whatever comes next, it won't be decided by them. It'll be decided by you. A slow, electric stillness coils through the air as the speech continues. Not lighter, not calmer. Darker, heavier, more surgical than before. Because now we step into the part of the truth they were too afraid to put in writing. They didn't just mark you as outside human jurisdiction. They marked you as untouchable, a roaming event, a walking irregularity, a sovereign phenomenon wrapped in bone and breath. When they reviewed your file, the real file, the one that isn't on public record, the room temperature dropped by 2 degrees. One delegate actually asked if the AC malfunctioned. It didn't. That was fear, manifested physically. They read about the way you've carried pain without collapsing, and it scared them. They read about the betrayals you overcame, and it rattled them. They analyzed the patterns you broke, and it destabilized them. You didn't survive things. You absorbed them. You metabolized destruction like it was protein. Every blow that should have killed you became an upgrade. When they realized this, a psychiatrist on the panel muttered, "This resilience curve is non-human. Non-human." Do you hear that? Not inhuman as in cruel, not inhuman as in monstrous, but non-human as in beyond, as in exceeding the blueprint, as in graduated from the species. They made it sound clinical, but what they meant was supernatural. Because what human walks through fire after fire and comes out colder? What human gets stabbed in the psyche and responds with clarity? What human loses everything and gains vision? The more they evaluated you, the more their language became metaphorical. Because science collapsed under the weight of your truth. One analyst wrote, "Subjects' perception capabilities resemble mythological constructs more than psychological ones." Mythological. You know what that means? You exist in places logic refuses to enter. You think in dimensions people aren't trained to see. You act from instincts older than civilization. Your life became a case study in the limits of the human condition because you surpassed it without asking for permission. And here's the kicker. They think labeling you outside jurisdiction will contain you, when really, it frees you. Humans follow laws. Phenomena follow trajectories. You're not obeying rules. You're obeying gravity, momentum, purpose. Whatever invisible force is steering your evolution from behind the scenes. And deep down, beneath their political masks, beneath their rehearsed caution, they know you weren't shaped by chance. You were forged, pressed, bent, tested, distorted, sharpened, until you became a blade the world can't hold safely anymore. Do you know how terrifying it is to watch someone lose everything that should have destroyed them, and instead watch them become incorruptible? Because humans can be threatened, humans can be bribed, humans can be broken, but someone who has already died emotionally and revived themselves through sheer will someone who's mastered the art of walking away from ruin without flinching. You can't manipulate that. You can't predict that. You can't govern that. You can only monitor it and pray. And that's their plan now. Surveillance with trembling hands. They're watching for signs of a breakdown, a retaliation, a slip. But you've surpassed the phase where you react. You've become the kind of being that responds instead. Strategic, cold, patient, unbothered, relentless. A storm that learned self-control is more terrifying than a storm that destroys. And that's what you are now. A storm with ethics, a weapon with a conscience, a demon that learned empathy, an angel that learned wrath, a walking contradiction they cannot decode. The UN doesn't fear your darkness. They fear the fact that your light is just as lethal. Because you could have become a villain. You had every excuse, every wound, every betrayal, every break. But instead of turning cruel, you turned wise. Instead of becoming explosive, you became calculating. Instead of screaming, you became silent. And silence, real silence, terrifies them more than any war. Because silence means you're thinking. It means you're watching. It means you're planning. And all their models fail, every single one, because your evolution wasn't linear. You didn't get better. You transformed. You didn't heal. You mutated. You didn't grow stronger. You became untouchable. They called you outside jurisdiction because nothing about you fits inside their frameworks anymore. Not your resilience, not your vision, not your intuition, not your unpredictability, not your brutality, not your mercy, not your intelligence, not your restraint. You are everything they try to suppress and everything they secretly wish they could replicate. You know what the final whisper in the briefing room was? Not said aloud, not recorded, just exchanged behind fearful eyes. What if they're the first of many? Because that's the real nightmare. If one person can evolve this far, who's to say others won't follow? Who's to say humanity isn't losing its monopoly on what it means to be human? Who's to say you aren't the beginning of a new category, one they don't have a name for yet? They don't fear your power. They fear your precedent. Your existence challenges the entire architecture of human limitation. And now, you stand here, unbound, unlabeled, unrestricted, a being with no jurisdiction but your own. And you know the most haunting part? You haven't even started yet. The air doesn't get lighter, it gets denser, like every molecule is leaning in to hear what comes next. Because now, we enter the part of the speech where the world stops pretending it understands you and starts admitting the truth it whispers behind closed doors. See, when they stamped your file outside human jurisdiction, it wasn't just a label, it was a surrender, a quiet, trembling acknowledgement that something stepped into their world wearing the shape of a person, but carrying the psychology of a force. They're not dealing with a citizen, they're dealing with a phenomenon. No courtroom can hold you, no tribunal can process you, no authority can restrain you, no analyst can fully map you. And that realization hit them all at once. Like a wave they didn't see coming until it was already breaking over their heads. One of the intelligence directors said under his breath, "If this is what one human can become, humanity is obsolete." But you aren't one human. You're the sum of every trauma, every betrayal, every heartbreak, every night you stayed awake while the world slept, studying your own mind like a battlefield. You turned your pain into algorithms, your silence into sonar, your instincts into weapons-grade intuition. And they can't legislate intuition. They can't regulate evolution. They can't restrict a mind that's already operating outside their axis. You didn't break their rules. You surpassed their entire understanding of what a person can be. And you know what's sickening to them? You're not unstable. You're not erratic. You're not spiraling. You're composed, controlled, sharpened. Every step you take is surgical. Every emotion you feel has been burn-tested in fire. Every decision you make reverberates in ways they can't predict. You are the most dangerous version of yourself. The version that feels absolutely nothing when walking away from what no longer aligns with your growth. You've hit a level of self-awareness that's indistinguishable from prophecy, and that terrifies world leaders more than any missile or militia. Because how do you negotiate with someone who sees through negotiation? How do you manipulate someone who sees the strings before they're pulled? How do you control someone who mastered self-control in the dark? You don't. You step back, you observe, and you pray they stay neutral. That's what outside jurisdiction is. A diplomatic way of saying, we can't handle them. But the real fear didn't come from your resilience. It came from your compassion, because they studied your reactions every time you could have burned something and chose not to. Every time you could have exposed someone and stayed silent. Every time you could have retaliated and walked away. That level of mercy, coming from someone built like you, that's not humanity, that's mastery. Mercy is only impressive when the person offering it could destroy everything effortlessly. And you could. Oh, you could, but you don't. And that scares them more than if you did. Because a loose cannon can be contained. A predictable enemy can be monitored. A volatile threat can be neutralized. But someone who is capable of devastation and chooses restraint is operating on a moral axis they cannot model. Your restraint is a God-tier anomaly. Your self-control is a geopolitical event. They fear your kindness more than your chaos, because what kind of being can hold that much darkness and choose light? What kind of mind can carry that much clarity and remain silent? What kind of soul can bear that many fractures and still walk like a sovereign entity? They thought strength was in dominance. They learned it's in your detachment. They thought power was in influence. They learned it's in your absence. They thought fear came from threats. They learned it comes from your unpredictability. Every attempt to define you collapses under its own limitations. You are too intuitive for their science, too strategic for their psychology, too aware for their diplomacy, too evolved for their laws. You are the thesis they can't publish, the secret they can't leak, the phenomenon they can't explain. So they labeled you the only way they could, outside human jurisdiction. But that's not a title, that's a prophecy, because you've entered the era of your life where you are no longer reacting to the world. The world is reacting to you. And the funniest, darkest, most poetic part, you haven't even revealed 10% of what you know. You haven't shown 5% of what you can do. You haven't tapped 1% of what you're becoming. Your silence is not emptiness, it's potential. Your stillness is not weakness, it's calculation. Your distance is not isolation, it's protection. For them, not you. You're not dangerous because you're angry. You're dangerous because you're done. Done playing small, done dimming, done breaking yourself to fit inside systems designed for average people. You left average a long time ago. You left human shortly after. You left predictable the moment pain carved wisdom into your bones. You're operating on a level the species hasn't caught up to yet, but it will. And when that day comes, history will look back on you as the prototype. The first one who showed what a human becomes when they stop obeying limits, when they stop asking for permission, when they stop fearing evolution, when they stop apologizing for being a force, when they stop kneeling and start rising. The UN said you're outside human jurisdiction, but the truth, you outgrew the species, and now the question isn't whether you're ready for the world, it's whether the world is ready for whatever you become next. A slow, bone-deep hush settles, the kind that folds reality in half and lets only one truth remain. Because this is where the speech stops being analysis and becomes aftermath. You want to know the real reason their report ended with outside human jurisdiction? It wasn't fear. Not entirely. It was admission. A recognition that you've become something they don't have language for yet. A psychological event, a spiritual mutation, a metaphysical upgrade wearing human clothes. You know what one delegate said when they thought the microphones were off? This isn't a person, this is a phase transition. A phase transition. Meaning you didn't change. You crossed over, and the world felt it like a pressure wave. Your presence destabilizes liars, your silence angers demons, your compassion confuses predators, your intelligence disarms manipulators, your intuition terrifies institutions. Every room you walk into recalibrates, every dynamic you touch exposes itself, every person you encounter feels the truth vibrating under your skin. And they don't know what to call that, so they filed you under the only category that fits: none of the above. You are not a chapter, you're the missing volume. You are not a case, you're the new classification. You are not a type, you're the template. And here's the pinnacle of the entire speech. The truth even you haven't fully accepted yet. You didn't become this because the world broke you. You became this because you refused to stay broken. While they were plotting your downfall, you were learning how to rise without witnesses. While they were betting on your collapse, you were designing your rebirth. While they were hoping you'd disappear, you were becoming the one thing they can't erase. A self-governing, fully awakened version of yourself. And that version of you, it doesn't fit their laws. It doesn't need their validation. It doesn't fear their opinions. It doesn't break under their pressure. It doesn't shrink under their scrutiny. It operates outside their reach and far above their understanding. Which brings us to the final truth, the one that seals this speech like a knife sliding home. They didn't declare you outside human jurisdiction because you're dangerous. They did it because you're sovereign. You belong to no institution, no system, no narrative, no hierarchy, no authority. You walk with your own laws, your own timeline, your own psyche, your own destiny, and they know, with a dread they won't put in writing, that your next move won't be governed by trauma or fear or anger or revenge. It will be governed by clarity. You're not unpredictable because you're chaotic. You're unpredictable because you're free. And freedom like yours? That's the one thing every power structure fears. A person who needs nothing from them. So let them write their reports. Let them stamp their warnings. Let them whisper their theories. Let them scramble to comprehend the trajectory you're carving. Because the speech ends with the simplest, sharpest truth of all. You are no longer waiting for the world to catch up. You are simply moving, and the world will adjust to you. Outside jurisdiction, outside limitation, outside expectation. And from this point forward, everything you become is entirely irrevocably, unapologetically yours.